Since January 20th of this year, there has been a lot of turnover, a lot of changes, a lot of people cheering, a lot of the diabolical crying out from the bowels of hell. Lots have changed in the world, especially, I don't want to say especially, but much of it in what we see in the LGBTQ world, some of the ideology being foisted upon the rest of us. Good changes, maybe bad changes. Don't know what's happening. My guest today, Katy Faust, she's the founder and president of Them Before Us. You may recognize her. She's been on my show before. She is the daughter of a mother who did leave her father for a woman just like me. We both were raised by a mom who had another partner, and we both had our dads in our lives, but we both understand a little bit better than maybe others about the harmful, the deleterious, I want to sound smart, that's a good word, right? The deleterious effects of this type of lifestyle, but much bigger picture. So today, Katy and I are going to start with Obergefell, which is the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling that legalized so-called gay marriage. Katy Faust, I want you to do most of the talking and not me. Welcome to Breakfast with Bacon. God bless you for the work you're doing. What are your thoughts? 2025, it's been 10 years.
Yes, thanks for having me on. Always appreciate your perspective, that you always, go right for the hard topics. Love that. Love, that we are sisters in arms, both
Yeah.
in terms of a bit of a childhood history, but also in terms of what we're pushing towards in the future. And I always, just for the sake of wanting to honor my mother and father, say my mom did not initiate the divorce. It was not a situation where she left my father. There was challenges in the marriages, and they both went on to form new relationships. But I never want to make it sound like, and she wouldn't put it this way, that she was some kind of closeted lesbian and needed to leave him. That wasn't the case. Their marriage broke up and they both went on to form their own lives afterwards. What is happening now is we look at a huge shift that took place 10 years ago in the marriage and family landscape, and that was the redefinition of marriage. What the Supreme Court did 10 years ago is they equated two things that, especially from the child's perspective, will never be equal. The union of a child's own mother and father offers them benefits that two unrelated adults or one unrelated adult never can. And that's what they did. The Supreme Court said you are not allowed to make any distinction between heterosexual couples, which in almost all cases, the way it's been historically understood, have united children to the two people to whom they have a natural right, and opposite sex couples, which in 100% of cases will separate a children from one adult to whom they have a natural right. So if you want to just evaluate whether or not these two pairings lead to similar fulfillment for adults, or they meet the desires of the adult parties, okay, you might be able to make that case. But if you want to look at marriage from the perspective of the child, what we did 10 years ago was foist a horrible burden of inequality onto the shoulders of children. And it's not just the children who then are brought into these intentionally motherless or fatherless homes. What Obergefell did is it sent shockwaves all through marriage and family policy, to the point now where 10 years later, we actually are seeing that mothers and fathers are becoming legally optional in the life of kids. We are
Yeah.
rewriting parenthood laws. We are redefining infertility. We are stripping the words mother and father out of a bunch of different provisions and codes in our federal and our state level laws. We are creating new pathways for adults to acquire unrelated children. And all of this is in the name of adult equality. So we're really at a place where we need to take stock about what the new civil rights for adults has cost the natural rights of children.
Which I love how you phrase that, always about the rights and the choices and the desires of the adults. Because one of the things that we tend to do in our ideological pushes, whether it's the LGBTQ or anything else, IVF, whatever we want to do, is we intentionally negate a part of the population so that the average Joe doesn't think about the children. I know. It doesn't make them selfish or anything, but it's like, oh, you're right. Parents should have rights. Same with abortion. You know what? That woman shouldn't be forced. But they never consider the other person who is the child or the victim of the so-called choice of these other adults. And so, yeah, we're not going to let you forget about the voice of the voiceless, which is the children here. And you woke me up to that, even though I was one of them, right? You woke me up to it going, yeah, let's give everybody an equal say in these matters, and let's not negate the ones that we are here to protect. I mean,
Yeah.
let's not forget that we're here to protect them.
I like the way that you frame that because really we can look at this challenge of adult desire being elevated above the rights of children. And you can absolutely see it playing out in the gay marriage debate, but you can see it in abortion and you can see it in the conversations around infertility. And you can see it on Instagram when you're scrolling through all these influencers that are telling women to leave their husbands, even though there's no abuse. They just need to find their true self. And wouldn't it be nice to have split custody because then you get 3 days just to like be on your own? And like there is no marriage and family conversation that has to do with parenthood. Unplanned pregnancies, very planned pregnancies, divorce, reproductive technologies, straight people, gay people, married people, single people, all of those conversations are obsessively focused on what adults want. They often will use or couch their aims in the language of rights, a right to choose, a right to parenthood, a right to marry, a right to happiness. And it's always the natural rights of children, their right to life, their right to their mother and father, that is the casualty. Why is that? Because kids can't defend themselves. They can't defend their own right to life. They can't defend their own right to their mother and father. They don't blog. They don't do interviews. They don't submit amicus briefs. You know, they are at the mercy of whatever adults decide. And that's why, at Them Before Us, one thing that we work on is creating an army of child defenders who will say, I'm going to put them before us. I'm going to put the kids before adults, regardless of whether it's just a conversation I'm having in my living room or at a coffee shop, or whether I'm engaging online, or whether I'm advancing child-centric legislation or fighting terrible legislation. We need to become a society that puts them before us, that puts kids first, even if it means that some adults are sad or offended or may not get what they want.
How do you create that army? What are you doing?
One of the biggest things is I tell people you need to be an expert on all of this. You need to know more about surrogacy, IVF, the harms of divorce, why marriage is a matter of justice for children than anybody else. When somebody comes to you and says, oh, what a shame, Chip and Joanna Gaines have just platformed a same-sex couple on their show. But on the other hand, like we really need to be like inclusive and welcoming and affirming. You need to be able to say, no, those two boys that they curated through the surrogacy process were, as far as they've disclosed, two of the 41 little lives that those men created. What happened to the other 39? They are going to stay frozen forever, or they were graded or sex selected or genetically screened out of existence. We love those two boys. We're grateful they're alive. They are a fraction of the children that those two men created. And what else are those two boys going to deal with? They're going to deal with mother hunger because children don't just want to be loved in the abstract. They crave maternal love and paternal love. And those two men starved them of the maternal love that they're supposed to be getting every day. And they're more likely to deal with identity struggles because their 22-year-old biological mother that sold her eggs to these men is going to be unknown to them. It's hard for those kids to answer the question, who am I? Because they will not be able to answer the question, whose am I? And maybe those two boys are a little more anxious, a little more clingy than a lot of other 10-year-olds. Why is that? Because many children who lose a relationship with their mother at birth struggle with trust and bonding and attachment in the future. This is why so many adoptees manifest higher rates of externalizing disorders like anxiety or cutting. Many of them have struggles in school because they had to start from ground zero, where every other baby that is born has a 9.5 month head start when it comes to forming human attachments. So you need to know more about this. You need to be able to respond to, well, maybe it's loving that Chip and Joanna Gaines included that same-sex couple in their programming. No, it's not. It's not just a violation of the convictions that the Gaines said that they hold themselves, but it actually institutes injustice and puts children at risk for a variety of different harms, and we need to go defend them. That's what I want. I want people to know so much about this. They come into all of these conversations as experts, take the focus off of adults, shine the spotlight on children, and then encourage everybody else to rise up and defend them.
Wow, that's amazing. I was listening to you thinking, gosh, is she articulate? And so part of it is like, is that natural or is that part of how you've been trained? I mean, you and I both know you have to know the arguments, and you don't have to be a well-trained, speaker like you who's a CEO of a company. Well, I mean, you don't have to be, but you do need to know the basics. You need to
Hmm.
understand when something isn't right, why. And I think this conversation is helping you and me help the viewers realize it's not about what you have, it's about what you're missing, because
Yeah.
that's always the thing they do. If we go back to the 1970s when no fault divorce was allowed, it was, but you get two Christmases.
Hmm.
Well, I don't want two Christmases. You don't look at the child and say, but I want one Christmas with my mom and dad there. And besides, when I have two Christmases, it's half the value of the toys because you had to divide the income. But the child doesn't have that ability to say that. So, my mom always says to me too all the time, Katie, it's like, well, you're always so good with words, and I don't have those good words. And I say, Mom, you just need to know
Hmm.
these truths, and God will give you the words that you need for the audience that you have at the time that you have that audience. So, God bless you though for having the words that you have. How do you prepare people then for this? Do you have training classes? What does them before us do? Do they go into the schools? Do they go into I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of places that don't want you to come in, but
Yeah.
yeah, how do
Yeah,
you do it?
well, like some of it is just like you. I'm a talker by design. And I really like people. I mean, I just did an interview with a gay journalist in Australia who's married to a man, and he has two surrogate born children. And it was a 2-hour conversation. His name is, if you want to look it up, I'll tell
I
you.
do. I'll
There,
put a link in the show
I'll
notes
put a
if it's
link
up
in there.
already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his name is Josh Zepps, and I really like him. Like he is violating everything that I believe and hold dear, but I'm like, I could be friends with this guy and tell him the truth, which you'll see for 2 hours. There was quite a bit of
Truth telling.
sparring that took place between us. Um, but I just naturally really like people. If you're going to harm children, then there will be words between us. And you can see some of that taking place in the interview. I don't have a whole lot of the only people that I don't like, and let me put that more, the only people that I hate, I really do, are Christians with large platforms who have a lot of access to biblical truth and who lead people astray on this topic. And so that I'm like, no mercy. I mean, you look at the punishment and the consequences that he inflicts on false prophets that are telling people that what is evil is good and what is good that is evil. Like hate is his word for it. Therefore, it should also be our approach towards it. Not that we ourselves inflict the justice, but we understand that there is very significant consequences for people that present themselves as speaking for God and then lead people towards hell or towards child victimization, which is what compromise on the topic of marriage and sex and divorce and reproductive technologies ultimately will lead to. So we equip people. Number one, our first book, Them Before Us: Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. If you're a reader, you will get through that with the hundreds of studies that we cite and summarize so that you understand the importance of biology and parenthood, the damaging impact of divorce on children's physical, mental, emotional, academic health, what the research really says about same-sex parenting, the stories of dozens of children created through third parties, through reproductive technologies, and why that leads to feelings of commodification and concerns about eugenics and longing to know the identity of their missing parent and the dozens or hundreds of half siblings that now exist out in the world that they're not exactly sure how to approach. Like, let me equip you. Like, the first book is the way to do that. The other thing that we have that is a resource, especially for people that identify as Christians, is a resource on our website, Them Before Us. If you go to resources for churches, we've got a free curriculum for small groups where we will take these natural law principles, these social science supported truths, and we will layer biblical revelation on top of that. It is something that works very well for both Catholics and Protestants. The two, those two groups, when they read it, they write back to us and they say, see, this is exactly what my church has been teaching. This is exactly what scripture has been leading us to. And so it's very validating for people because this is not just a matter of the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. It's the Bible says it. It is verified by everything that we can see and know based on objective reality and natural law. It is supported by the children who had to be raised in or endure
The
the kind
unnatural
of
situations.
the unnatural situations, the heartbreaking situations, the two Christmases. And you're going to hear directly from them whether or not they thought the extra presents was a good makeup for the home that is now destroyed. And so, like, we have resources, the book, the curriculum for Christians, but we also talk to lawmakers. We spend quite a bit of time making recommendations in terms of policy for state level lawmakers. We are very connected to the family policy institutes across the country to help them fight bad legislation, which has exploded in the wake of Obergefell. So we're very, very busy trying to get to people in the personal space and in the political space.
You kind of answered my next question about since Obergefell, it's been 10 years. Has it gotten worse? What has gotten worse? And it seems like there's been an explosion of people going, oh, if the government says it's okay, it must be okay. And
Yeah.
people who didn't approve of it before are now, I mean, we saw with the DEI policies, which really weren't, in my opinion, really weren't about color and race. They were all about sexuality. And
Mhm.
so let's just make sure we have someone who has a perverted form of sexual preferences. And I know that word is not acceptable anymore. People don't want to hear the word perverted, but perverted means twisted. It's twisting truth. But so for the people who just have a perverted type of sexuality, who'd have thought, would you have thought when 20 years ago that you would see parades and streets with men in bondage and their backside sticking out and men behind them spanking them? Just last week, and I have to be careful because I'm not bad mouthing my daughter, but my daughter, I was visiting her at her house. She had a TV show on. The television was to her back. I don't even know the name of the show. And I walked in and she and I were talking. I was facing her television, and on that screen came an image, a full shot of a man naked on all fours on the ground and a woman standing behind him. And they made it into a comedy when someone walked in and was like, oh my gosh, isn't it supposed to be the other way around? And then the woman walks out from behind the man and she's wearing a strapped on tool and it's hanging there and it's a full view. Now, this is from a girl I grew up in born in 1964, kissing on TV. It wasn't even the heavy. I could go into it. Maybe I shouldn't have described that, but I was appalled when I saw it. It hasn't left my mind and it's been in there. And her child could have walked into the room at any point, which by the way, he did, but it was off the screen at that point. And so my thoughts are, how perverted have we as a society come that my daughter, raised in a Catholic school, Catholic mom, Catholic education, can have that on, whether or not she knew that scene would come, that the producers of a television show could even do that. And again, I mean, I could go on and on. Just having what Will and Grace was hysterical 10 years, 15 years ago when it was on, because it normalized how nice homosexual people can be. And as you and I know, just because someone has same-sex attraction doesn't make them not a nice person. You know, I love my mom, you love your mom, and it can be fun and funny and all that. But since then,
Mhm.
it's gone from just accepting this to putting twisted, perverted, pornographic, evil, now involving children. So I guess you are ready with your nodding and the things you said. We've seen how perverse it's come in the past 10 years. Can we turn this around? Are we turning this around? And have you seen any tangible ways of turning this around since January 20th, when President Trump came in and said, enough?
We can turn it around. I do see several signs that there is hope. I think that the biggest indication that this is not some inevitable arc that bends towards the progressive ideology is that the transgender dominoes have begun to fall. And you see that we're winning at the Supreme Court on a lot of those different matters. The court is upholding different states that have tried to ban transgender treatments for children, which is just chemical and surgical sterilization of kids before the age of 18. The Trump administration has insisted that boys cannot be in girls' sports. There's been executive orders talking about how there can be no gender ideology taught in public schools. And so this is all very positive. The fight is not over, but it shows that these kinds of progressive movements to overhaul the social fabric are not inevitable. And that actually, when you choose to speak up in ways that I say are judicious and well calibrated, you actually can reverse the clock. You can go back in time towards a structure that's a little more grounded in reality. So, what does it look like? Well, how do you do that well? Why is it that I think the transgender dominoes have started to fall so quickly? It is not because we said, oh, this is a religious liberty issue, which does not motivate anybody.
Right.
It's not because we all went out and said, God made them male and female, which is true, but also does not connect with the vast majority of Americans. What happened with the transgender debate is the child victims were absolutely unavoidable. We saw very, very clearly how children were harmed because we confused male and female. We saw it in the pool, we saw it on the track, we saw the scars, the top surgery scars of girls that had elective double mastectomies because their parents were told that this is the only way to prevent their child from committing suicide. We've heard the voices of women who only took testosterone for 1 year, but now they sound like a chain smoking 45-year-old, even though they've desisted. We've heard the stories of boys. We've seen Jazz Jennings go through everything that a transgender person supposedly needs to validate and live a successful, fulfilling life,
And he's
still
miserable.
continue to be plagued with terrible bouts of depression and obesity and mental health struggles. The child victims were unavoidable, so obvious, and that is what caught enough Americans' attention to say, I actually might be willing to speak up and lose friends about this because it's so clear that if this ideology advances, children are going to be harmed. So that is actually the recipe, in my opinion, for returning to sane marriage policy, getting back to the place where we are limiting or eliminating abortions. We always have to get to the point where we properly identify the victims, and the victims are not 45-year-old transgender cross-dressing men that want to pee, right? The victims are the 8-year-old who will find themselves in the bathroom with no windows or doors alone with that 45-year-old man. Those are the real victims. The victims of abortion are not women whose career path might be interrupted. The victims are the child who will lose their right to life. The victims in marriage are not gay adults who never knew if they were going to be able to have a family and grew up in the closet and suffered so much, which is true. But marriage is not some sort of national therapy to help you feel better. When you redefine marriage, children are victims. And so, what we need to do is we need to start properly identifying the victims. Don't let adults take the spotlight and frame themselves as the victims. We need to humanize the children who have suffered because of this. And then we need to insist that policy, whether it's abortion policy or transgender policy or marriage policy, works to protect children and not adults.
So what do we do once we find these people who we haven't stopped these things from happening? That we find the child whose parents still chose to enter into a gay marriage. I think specifically about a family member I have now who's currently pregnant with a child from IVF. And again, everyone's giving the applause about, it's not your fault. You had that disease that killed your ovaries and you had to, extract your own eggs. And so this child is going to be half hers and half a stranger's. And I did my talking. I told her some of the stats and, some of the things that I first got back were like, oh, that's just 1 in a million. Most babies are fine with it. You just met the one that wasn't.
Mhm.
So, and such that this family member didn't even want to tell me that she was, using that. Although I said, I'm going to find out anyway. But I said, well, now that you're pregnant, I'm not going to not love this child. This child is still made in the image and likeness of God. So I'm celebrating the baby. I'm going to go to the baby shower. I'm not going to ostracize.
Mhm.
How do we then, what are some of your suggestions for people like in that situation? That's an IVF example, or the children who are born in as a or have been purchased. Let's just say that they've been purchased by gay couples who literally paid money to get
Yeah.
these children. What do
Yeah.
we do for them now once
Right.
they're
Or your
here?
niece has decided that she needs to get a divorce. Or your
Yeah.
single sister who's 42 and desperately wanted to be married but hasn't found Mr. Right, decides that her biological clock is ticking and it's now or never, and she needs to go down to the sperm bank and get a kid. Or your brother who has same-sex attraction, who is a wonderful guy and would be a wonderful husband, and just committed 5 years to his partner, and they really would like to be dads. I mean, you could go on and on and on about the kinds of situations where adults are putting their own desires, even some that are really legitimate, like the desire for being a mom, above the rights and well-being of children. And all of us need to figure out, how do we walk in that tension? And there's two clean and easy and wrong ways to deal with those situations. The first option is to cut the person out of your life completely, and hold on to your convictions. And if you take that route, you'll never have to have uncomfortable conversations. The other option is to completely embrace everything that the person thinks and says and does. And if you do that, you'll never have to have uncomfortable conversations. So those are your two incorrect options that both are going to offer some very neat and clean narratives moving forward about how you've been able to stand firm, right? So the real way to do this, especially if you consider yourself somebody that views scripture and biblical truth as your authority, is you need to hold on 100% to the preciousness and the worth of the LGBT identifying person, the person that's considering divorce, the single person that's considering the sperm donor baby, the IVF couple that is desperately wants to be pregnant, but now they've got 15 embryos on ice in storage, right? You hold on to the recognition that these people are loved by God and they have human dignity, and God put you in their life so that you could love them well. And you need to do that 100%. You also cannot let go of truth at all. Not 1%, not 99%, with all of your might. A little
bit of leaven spoils the whole loaf.
That's right. You cling to it. Now, if you're doing both of these 100, first of all, the world says you cannot do both of these. The world says you have to choose. Scripture says you cannot choose. You have to do both, and you have to do them with all your might. So people come to me, just like the scenario that you said, and they go, "Oh my gosh, I have this situation. My neighbor just decided that he was now going to transition to be a man, and he started wearing dresses, and our kids have always played together, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I've had these conversations. I've tried to talk with my kids. It's so messy." And I've almost started to say, if it's messy, it's probably because you're being biblical, because you've rejected the two extremes that would opt you out of the uncomfortable conversations, or you've chosen to hold on to your convictions, which means you must have difficult conversations. So that's the answer. The answer is engage faithfully. And I would even say engage sacrificially. You go to the baby shower, you give the baby a wonderful gift. Then the two moms next door who have the sperm donor boy who's 9 years old, you house sit for them and take them casseroles when they're sick. And I mean, all of that, like, you engage sacrificially with people that disagree. And when they say, "What do you think? We're going to head down to the fertility clinic because we feel like so-and-so needs a sibling," you say, "I've read too many stories of kids who grew up without a father. And I've actually noticed your 9-year-old hanging around my husband a lot because it's very, very clear that he wants a dad. And so what you're doing in some ways is understandable, but really you're asking another child to sacrifice for you. And that's an injustice." And so if I had to say that, I've had conversations like that. I do it with fear and trembling. That's not an easy thing for me to say. I'm always worried that they're going to hate me or reject me or cut me off or think that I'm a hateful, horrible bigot. But child protection and child defense is one manifestation of our pure and undefiled religion before God. And it always has to be a part of the Christian witness. And the place where that is going to be the most relevant is in conversations about marriage, family, and parenthood.
Amen. I know you're not Catholic, and I don't even think that I mentioned this to you in the last podcast, but the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, has been appearing around the world. And, church is very, 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 takes a long time to approve these. So, one of the most famous approved Marian apparitions in Fatima, Portugal. Are you familiar with that?
I just heard of it.
Okay, so in Fatima, Portugal, Our Lady appeared.
And I've obviously been mispronouncing it because when I read it, it says Fatima in my mind.
Yes. Well, and when I went to Portugal, actually, they said Fatima. So, hey, I'm mispronouncing it too. But the common American bastardization is Fatima. So, and actually, that's an image right there of Our Lady of Fatima with the three children. It's kind of covered up. Anyway, the three children, Jacinta, Francisco, and Lucia, were 9, 11, and I cannot remember the other age. 11, 9, 11, 11, 9, 11, 12, whatever. And she showed them heaven. She showed them hell. She showed them purgatory, souls fallen in. People are like, well, don't tell the kids this, that, blah, blah, blah. That's not really why I'm bringing it up. But when she was showing this to these small children, she also said to them, the final battle between God and Satan would be for marriage and the family. And she said, the first two children, Jacinta and Francisco, you're going to die within a year. And they did. And Lucia lived until about 5 years ago. And she was a nun for 90 some years old. And she talked about those visions to Our Lady and said, with Our Lady, I should say, and said, we have to stop doing what we're doing. We've got to repent. We have got to turn back. Because we have entered that generation. I don't know that there's anything left when you're chopping off genitals, when you are, chopping off body parts, when you're injecting people with drugs, when you're killing innocent babies for your own pleasure. Maybe Satan is way more evil than I can comprehend, but I can't comprehend how much worse could happen. Which says we are in that period. We are in that season of the final battle between God and Satan. And the good news is that God chose you, Katy, and God chose me, and God chose all of you viewers to be around for such a time as this. And it is the mightiest of battle, and God always equips his warriors with the graces that they need to overcome in that battle. So again, you may not be articulate like Katy, you may not have a PhD, you may not really feel confident, but the Lord said, I need you to speak these truths. I need you to fight this battle. I need you to stay married. I need you to, even though you have a loveless marriage, to stay in that marriage for those children. I need you to fight for the kids. I need you to fight your inclinations for same-sex attraction. I'm sorry that you have them. There's help. But fight them and don't listen to the world. So that is one of the things I think that we can do is go, let's sacrifice the self. Let's sacrifice our own pleasures, carry our crosses, because it is in the carrying of the cross that the greater reward comes in heaven. And these things that we're seeing with marriage and family are the greatest. I know that's kind of like just a statement monologue instead of a question, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you think, again, you're not a Catholic, but even hearing that the final battle, marriage and family, do you think we're in that battle?
Well, actually, you can see an attack from Genesis 1 and 2 until the restoration in Revelation 21 and 22. That, like, after the fall in the garden, what do you see? Like, immediately after that, you see death, right? You see
Yeah, Cain kills Abel.
sacrifice and murder, right, take place. So an affront to the Imago Dei in terms of taking somebody's life. And then later on, Cain grows up and he becomes a polygamist. So it's like right there, the attack on life and the attack on marriage is an immediate result of the fall. So I don't know if it's new. It's been ongoing.
Yeah.
It is something that all throughout Israel's history, God has had to erect a variety of different laws saying that these two things, innocent life and the union and connection between man and woman, has to be protected because all of the nations around Israel were practicing forms of child sacrifice and sexual immorality and sexual rights, rights, that we've just rebranded as sexual rights. So much of this, I mean, mutilating children, that has been around, in the Romans times in the form of making eunuchs. It's existed throughout Islamic history in the form of female genital mutilation. It even existed in places like China, where we were mutilating little girls' feet in the name of, keeping them submissive and allowing them to be marriageable. But I don't know if it means that we're in the end times, but I do think that it means that this has always been a primary front of attack from the enemy, attacking the Imago Dei, and by extension, attacking the male female complementarity.
Complementarity.
especially as reflected in marriage, because it's a life-producing institution. So it's very, very serious, and it's theological. I think a lot of people think, well, these are political issues. I don't want to get involved. It's political only because the political has taken over the theological. They are now addressing theological questions. And that's not an indication that Christians need to back away. It's an indication that we need to engage more fully, because we Christians are the only ones that have the right answer to what it means to be human, and what it means to be a child, and what it means to be male and female. And then you can answer, what does it mean to be married, and when should we consider divorce, and should we make life or take life through abortion or reproductive technologies? First, you have to get those foundational biblical questions of the human person correct. And those are not questions that evolutionists or secular humanists are going to be able to answer. They've tried, and that's part of the reason why we are seeing rampant
Perversion.
genetic screening through IVF, and death with dignity, killing off our old people through government subsidized programs like Made in Canada. I mean, like that's why we've eradicated Down syndrome from Iceland, because they're killing all of the Down syndrome babies before they're born. I mean, we are seeing assaults on the human person because the Christian ethic of understanding what it means to be human is not like populating our ideas about how to address these issues. All of it just means Christians need to engage more fully. And unfortunately, we've been withdrawing.
And you just made me think about, I know our time is short. You made me think about one more thing that, again, all of us need to pay attention. I saw a video recently of a woman being coerced. Her son was supposedly brain dead.
Mm.
And she's like, I don't want you to take his organs. And they were literally on video saying, he wanted this, and you need to let him do this. There are lives that can be saved. And then I saw in the same scrolling that someone who came out of a coma 5 years later. So people are being pressured. Oh, your child's brain dead. They'll never come out. They give their organs away. They're being pressured to give up the lives of their kids instead of having the doctors say, no, if you want to keep this child alive, then we'll do what we can do. It is just this culture of death. And it's not thinking about that child who may even be hearing everything you're saying, because we're starting to find that they can hear while they're in comas. I mean, it's
Mhm.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really, we have got to figure out what it means to be human. And a lot of the world is sort of a Gnostic idea, like they are separate, they're in conflict with one another, or all that matters is your consciousness, your body is irrelevant. We're kind
Yeah,
of wading
we are
into
body,
those
mind, and
waters with
spirit.
AI, that kind of thing. Or we swing towards, well, your body is the only thing that matters. And, your soul, what is that? There's nothing there. It is so important that we understand that we are a mind-body unity, that these two things go together, that you're not fully human without one or the other. And because humans have both, they all deserve protection, from the most vulnerable to the strongest, to the play to at both poles of the human experience, where we tend to be so vulnerable when we're very young and we're very, very old. So, I mean, there's just such a place for Christians to become experts, practice having these conversations. One of the reasons why I can do this is because I have lots of reps, I talk about it all the time. So get out of your bubble, have some of those conversations. You can start safe, with people that largely agree with you. Create a cohort of people that are ready to defend children together. You can like do a book club together, go through our small group curriculum together, and just get equipped, be comfortable, be familiar with this, because the threats to children are extreme and it's not getting any better.
Yeah, you just answered my last question, which is name one thing you'd have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today, and you just answered that. One fill in the blank. When I die, I will know my life has been a success
If everybody looks at my interactions online with my kids, with my husband, and says she did the will of God.
amen to that. Katy Faust, where can we find you? I know thembeforeus.org, right?
Thenbeforeus.com.
.com.
And we would love for you to stay connected to us. There's a place where you can subscribe. We'll keep you posted on all our work. We'll tell you about new resources that are coming out, but please, please join this child-centric fighting force.
Get the book that, even though we did another show that talked about the book Them Before Us, there will be a link to that book in the show notes. Powerful, very good book. It'll give you some of the stats that you're looking for. Any other new books that you have written since then or we have published?
I wrote with my co-author, Stacey Manning, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. And it's just, how do you pass on your worldview when everything in your child's life is lying to them? The schools, their friends, the media, their social media, maybe your extended family's not on the same page. But you can build kids that influence the culture rather than are influenced by the culture. So that book is helpful if you just find yourself in the trenches or you have grandkids and your children are like, what do I do? Like, I'm not, I obviously like the culture's coming for your kids. And then we put together a book called Pro Child Politics, where I conscripted 19 subject matter experts on everything from immigration to energy to the environment to education to pornography to policing to DEI, and said, if you were to put children first in these areas, what would the policy look like? So that's kind of applying our them before us
Awesome.
principle to all of politics.
I actually had your Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City right there on my coffee table. One of my clients came in and said, oh, can I borrow this book? Absolutely. Shared it with her kids, got a copy of her own. And sometimes that's all we have to do. Put the book on your coffee table. That'll start the conversation. I'm talking fast because my guest is under great demand and she promised me only 45 minutes. Katy Faust. God bless you. May the Lord bless the work of your hands, protect you, your family, your mind, give you all the graces that you need to teach this, spread this word until the very last breath that comes out of your lungs. And then when you do die and you meet him, you can say, well done, my sweet daughter. You did good and faithful servant. You did a great job. So
Awesome. Thank you for letting me chat with your audience today. I'm so grateful for your voice and your platform.
thank you. And I think I forgot to tell Katy how we end the show. We're going to see if she remembers. If she forget, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me, breakfastwithbacon.com, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Rumble. Don't know if I'm forgetting any. If I do, they're in the show notes. So I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life. Do you remember? Did I tell you? Sunny side up. Say it. You
I
can
was,
still say it.
yeah, sunny side up, baby, of course.